All right, so if you're the type that has less anxiety, if you know what's coming, let me explain how I envision this going, and then we'll just see we'll just see how it goes. So what I envision tonight, you guys have worked today, is we'll go to just about 10 after 8 or something, okay? And then that relieves them and allows you to get home. We'll come back tomorrow, and we'll come back at 10, and we'll do another session, and then we'll have a live Q&A, all right? So good, let's set some ground rules on that. First of all, good Q&As are entirely based on good cues, all right? So let's talk about what a good question is. A good question is shortly stated, right? 20 seconds or less. If you can't state your question in less than 20 seconds, think about it until you can, right? That's number one. Number two, they're non-antagonistic, all right? So we're under a mandate by the Apostle Paul to do all things without grumbling or disputing with one another. A dispute by definition is anytime someone starts with their conclusion, okay? If you start with your conclusion, I'll graciously let you have your conclusion because I'm 48 years old. I've never once ever been able to change someone who started with their flag in the ground, all right? And plus, if you have a tendency to start with your flag in the ground, there's something underneath that that's gonna ruin your marriage anyway, all right? So we're gonna do that. So it's non-antagonistic. Two, it's mutually edifying. In other words, your question's not so specific to you that it doesn't apply to anybody else, right? So I do care about your Aunt Susie's mole on the back of her knee. I do, just not today, all right? So if we, at the end of this tomorrow, if we have any non-antagonistic, mutually edifying questions, we'll be glad to talk it through. I love to do live Q&As just simply because it guarantees that I get to talk about what you want to talk about instead of me monologuing. One thing before we go on, if you want to follow an actual Bible, Ephesians chapter 5, we're going to get to that in a second. If not, we've obviously created some really easy to follow along with slides that will come up behind me. After this is over, I do have a small table set up back there with our teaching resources in audio and video. The reason we do that is we use the money from that to fund our missions in the world. We believe that we're not simply called to go to heaven when we die. We're called to bring heaven to every place we see hell here. And so we use the money from that to do that. Let me tell you a quick story before we get going that will answer the question, if you don't know me, why does this guy live on the earth? So I have a very diverse background. I was raised Pentecostal holiness, right? Because the word Pentecostal wasn't enough. They added the word holiness to it. My grandmother never cut her hair in her life, never wore makeup in her life, never wore jewelry in her life, never wore slacks in her life, never went to a movie in her life, never anything. Like, never had fun in her life, right? So you lost salvation every time you sinned. But I went to a fundamentalist Baptist school for 12 years. So I went to church at the Pentecostals on the weekend, was educated by the Baptists, then went to a Presbyterian Reformed seminary that was also interdenominational, and then I've been mentored by a Pentecostal Spirit-filled rabbi for the last 22 years. All right, so I've covered the gamut. It's full on, right? And so I have 2 theology degrees, and I have a master's degree in clinical psychology, specifically in the area of sex and marriage, right? So I am a theoretical expert, okay? In theory, I'm the best. In practice, pretty much crap. But in theory, you're looking at the expert, right? And so as I've journeyed and traveled the world for 22 years, I have found the most pleasure in making someone's life better who can do nothing in return. So for us, we support 3 children's homes in China that look after children with disabilities. Sometimes they're really severely disabled, like have to wear a helmet kind of disabled. Sometimes they're just left on the street because they have a cleft palate. And so the government works with us. We have full permitting to do what we do. They actually love us there. And so we help feed, clothe, shelter, educate disabled children. Let me tell you one story that really moved me. This will tell you why I live on the earth. So I was in Auckland, and this lady pulled me aside and said, look, when that slows down, could I have 3 minutes of your time? It's a story that will encourage you, and you're gonna wanna hear it, and just 3 minutes of your time. And I said, sure. She seemed really awesome, and she didn't start with, God told me we're gonna be together, so I thought that's okay, right? So I went to the side, and she was a doctor. She is a doctor. And this is my language, not hers. She chose to give a first fruits of her medical practice to the poor. So when she got her doctor license, she gave the first 2 years of her medical practice to the poor. And the cause that she gave it to was to our children's homes. Now, I knew that she was there, but I didn't get a file on her. I'd never met her. And so she gave 2 years of her medical practice to the children's home that we help run. And she said, I've got 15 of these stories, but I got to tell you about one. And I said, okay, please do, lay it on me. And if you want to tell me all 15, that's fine, because this is great, right? She said, well, there was a little baby boy, and newborn, left on the side of the road. And the reason he was left on the side of the road was because he was born without an anus, right? Now that's a harrowing sentence to start with, seriously. Like, it's scientifically stated, but of all the things you take for granted in life, a working anus has gotta be up there, right? And so she's doing a physical examination, and they couldn't work out why he was left, and then she noticed he was born without his intestines, an exit strategy there. And so you can't live like that. So she wrapped him in a blanket, and she got on a bus. It was a 2-hour bus ride to the hospital that had the surgeon that was skilled enough to do this. Evidently, making an opening is not a problem. It's connecting the nerves. That's the problem. And on the way there, they called us and said, do you have enough money in your USB fund to pay for this kid's surgery? It was $8,000 US. And so, because you got to pay for it up front. And so we were able to do that. And the surgeon was able to make an opening, connect everything up. And 2 years later, upon subsequent examination, the kid is otherwise normally developed. And so this kid's gonna have a full life of kindness and compassion, and just is gonna live a great life. And so as I travel the world, I get asked 70 questions a week at least about all kinds of stuff, about politics and social issues and the book of Revelation and all kinds of stuff. And honestly, I think we should put far less energy on all of that until every kid on earth has a working anus. Until every kid on earth, until their intestines work properly, we just shouldn't be arguing about end times and things like that. And so that's what I do with that back there. And so since the last time I was here, there's 7 brand new series. There's a whole series on the book of Romans, a whole series on the book of Genesis. I did preach through the whole book of Revelation. That was here last time, but if you missed out on that, that's back there as well. I also just finished an 18-part series on the life of Christ. It's done in 3 6-part series. And so over the course of the weekend, you'll have plenty of opportunity. The only thing I'm asking is, if you don't want anything, God bless. If you do want something, it would help me if you got it tonight or tomorrow, because then the Sunday traffic, it just helps with traffic control. The only thing I want to say about that is 2 months ago, I'm very excited about this, we were able to release a web streaming library of all of our content. And so we can't travel with all of our content, so we put it on a web streaming service that just is on your phone. It is a web-based app, so if you save it to your home screen, it'll just act like an app. So there's a QR code back there. You come by and do that. What they tell me is if all you do is create a free profile, doesn't cost you anything, evidently it helps us. I don't know how, but evidently it does. So that'll be back there during the course of the next 2 days, and of course on Sunday. So we're gonna talk about marriage. And so I wanna handle the elephant in the room first. I'm not married. Okay, so I just, if somebody's saying, man, this guy's not even married, what's he got to say about this? Okay, I understand, I get that, and maybe I don't, but here's the thing, and I understand how you'd feel that way. But just a couple things. One, I do have a master's degree in this area, so clinically I am qualified to talk about this. Also, in the Bible, almost 100% of marriage advice is from single men, okay? Or people married to 1,000 people, all right? So if your rule is, they have to be just like us for us to take advice from them or to hear from them, I think we miss out on a lot of things anyway. Now, we're gonna be talking a lot of science, all right? So a lot of what I'm gonna do in the next 2 days is based on the work of primarily three people. Dr. Emerson Eggerichs wrote a great book called Love and Respect. Also, the Gottman Institute released the longest longitudinal study of marriage ever done in the history of the United States on what makes a good marriage. And so a lot of what's in here is gonna be about that. Also, there's an Irish philosopher pastor named Peter Rollins who wrote a book called The Divine Magician. And so a lot of what we're gonna talk about in here comes from those 3 books, as well as me mixing in my entertaining stuff in the middle of it. So I can't recommend those 3 books highly enough, and those 3 studies. And so we're gonna talk a bit about theology. We're gonna talk a bit about science. We're gonna talk a bit about philosophy. And over the course of the next 2 days, we're gonna start with the general and work to the particular. So tonight's gonna be a general sort of ideas talk. And then tomorrow, we're gonna use the Gottman Institute study on what exactly constitutes what we're talking about in terms of specific behaviors. All right, so we're gonna talk about that. And then we'll do a Q&A. Now, everything we're gonna talk about assumes 2 things: that whoever you're married to is basically good-hearted and basically mentally healthy, right? So basically, you got to assume those two things, right? Because if you married a lunatic, there's nothing I can do or anybody can do, okay? If you married a psychopath, what would you like us to do, right? But if you married someone who's basically good-hearted and basically mentally healthy, marriage is still a challenge, largely because of preference. Men and women just prefer different things. Marriage is so complex that the Bible can't even agree on what to say about it, right? If I was to say, is the Bible for or against marriage? Well, it depends on who you read. Solomon was very for it. He who finds a wife finds a good thing. Rock, right? Paul was pretty against it. He who marries does not sin, but he signed up for a life of pain. Who's right and who's wrong about that? Well, both, depending on who you marry, right? What's the Bible say about marriage? Well, Solomon's like, marriage, let's do it. A lot, right? Paul was like, please make it your last decision. Why? Because of preference. Men and women just prefer different things at the most base level too, like smells. Women prefer sweet smelling things, flowers, perfume, candles. If you buy any woman in this room a bouquet of flowers, every single one of them is gonna sniff it, right? They're just gonna smell it. You hand a man a bouquet of flowers, all he smells is $70. That's what that costs, right? But a woman, she likes sweet smelling things. Like the biggest mall in Pasco would have a candle shop. It's hard to imagine, right? How does a shop make a year's worth of revenue selling wax? How does that happen? Women, right? You go there at any point during the day, and there'll be two women in there sniffing wax, calling it fun, right? They just hand it back and forth. You'll never see two men doing that. You imagine that? Hey, Billy, check that out. That's that new white lilac scent, man. That is something special. No way. Why? Because men prefer stinky things. There's nothing funnier to a group of men than when something stinky happens. We find that hilarious. Women find that disgusting. And these people are supposed to live together? Of course, and it's just in our DNA. Listen, if you're in a pickup basketball game in 97 degrees in Pasco, Washington, and you get to the end of this pickup basketball game and you're hot and sweaty and nasty and disgusting, and you have to get to a meeting. So you take a quick shower and you shower up, you take your dirty, sweaty, nasty clothes, you put it in a plastic bag, you tie it up and put it in the trunk of your car. 3 months later, you're looking for something in the trunk of your car, and you remember, oh, that's where my basketball clothes are. Now, you pick up this bag of known stinky things, and every man in this room knows what must happen. Every single one, if it's in our DNA. If there's a bag of known stinky stuff, we have to sniff it. So what's gonna happen is, and every man in this room's done this, you open up the bag, and you just take, it's like, oh, now here's the thing, it doesn't just end there. If you have 4 friends around you, they all owe you a courtesy sniff of your stinky thing. You will see grown men pass around a bag of known stinky stuff, and every one of them are, oh, Jim, that's a good one. Oh, yeah, that's a good one. But then I owe them a courtesy sniff of their stinky thing. That's why if you're ever stuck in traffic in Pasco at a red light, and there's 4 guys in one car, and the windows are down, and 3 of them have their head out the window, and the 4th one's laughing, he just cashed in on his courtesy sniff, right? And that's just it, like it's just in us. You're not gonna change that about us. It's in our DNA. Even if you train a man to put his clothes in the dirty clothes hamper thing, right? So they come home from work, you train him to put the clothes in the clothes hamper thing. Every man in this room has done this. Every single man has done this, especially if they don't think anybody's watching, right? Here's what they do. They take their clothes off, and they drop it in the hamper, right? And every man waits and puts his socks in last, right? Because there's nothing more attractive than a side profile of a naked man in socks, right? And so what they do is they take the clothes off they've worked all day in, they'll take their socks, and I swear before they drop it in, it's involuntary. They just go. It's like we prove we work. Yes, I smell. And I swear, if those socks don't smell bad enough, this is what it'll be. I think I can get one more wear out of these. I can tell you that right now, right? And so these are the dynamics that are going on. Women prefer stinky things. Women prefer sweet smell things. Men prefer stinky things. Even in our language, if a woman says, I have nothing to wear, a man goes and looks at the closet and says, you have a closet full of nothing to wear. You're a liar, right? But every woman in this room knows what I have nothing to wear means. It means I have nothing new. When a woman says, I have nothing to wear, what she means is, I have nothing new, let's go shopping. But when a man says, I have nothing to wear, he means, I have nothing clean, please do laundry, right? And so these people are supposed to try to live together. So these things get complex. It is just like that. So there's also this idea that in this room, I don't think there's any non-married people except me, and there's this idea of having to find the one. And as soon as I say something like that, we just need to find the one. We just need to find the one. Everybody in here should roll their eyes, right? Because there's no such thing as the one. There's no such thing as finding the one. That's just stupid, right? Like somebody says, I need to find the one. No, that's dumb. You need to become the one that the one you're looking for is looking for. And if you become the one that the one you're looking for is looking for, you might find what you're looking for. It's funny when somebody's looking for a 10 and in fact they're a 4, right? And that's the kind of dynamic that goes on. So there's this guy named Paul, and he's not married, and he's not married. He wishes no one was married, according to his writings, evidently. And yet he understands that marriage is a reality for most people. And so he writes some real rabbinic wisdom about what makes a marriage work. And so my friend Mike is on the slides, and Mike is going to make all of our lives better tonight, and already has made my life better. I just really appreciate Mike. And Mike, if you could hit that next slide for me. So this is Ephesians chapter 5. So husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing of water through the word, to present her to himself as a radiant church without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. Next one. In the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. However, each one of you also must love his wife as he loves himself. And the wife must respect her husband. It's interesting how this works because Paul is talking in obvious platitudes. Like if I was to say, hey, guys, seriously, your best path forward for the happiest life is to be loving to your wife, right? Well, no one's gonna go, no way. No, we need less love. No one's gonna do that, right? But that doesn't really matter because words matter less than how we picture words working. So every person in this room has a working picture of what it means to be loving. And the question is, does our working picture of what it means to be loving equate with what our spouse pictures love to be? And so this is where the science really helps us. So we're going to get into this by tomorrow morning. We're going to get into this, the specifics of what the science clearly says is if you married a basically good-hearted, basically mentally healthy woman, these behaviors are what they interpret as loving behaviors, right? And if I was to say, hey, ladies, seriously, the biggest path forward to increase feelings of love in the home is to show respect to your husband. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. I don't think anybody would go, no, my house is better when I'm disrespectful and sarcastic and critical and cantankerous and possessive and jealous. And quite frankly, I want my husband to pray for a comet to come to earth to bring him sweet relief from me. I don't think any of us would ever do that. But the question isn't what respect is. The question is, how do we picture respect working in our head? Because words don't matter. And then is the way we were raised, the way respect works, does that equate to what a man interprets as respect, or is it something a little bit off? And this is where the science really helps us. So tomorrow we're gonna talk specifically about behaviors that the science is ultimately clear on. By the way, this shouldn't surprise anybody, men are much easier to figure out than women. We're very, very simple people. Basically, be nice and get naked and we are happy, right? If there's kindness and nudity, we are flipping in. Like this is heaven on earth. But we're gonna talk about the specific, are we having fun yet? We're having fun. I figure you're coming to church on a Friday night. We may as well have a little bit of fun. We're talking about the specific behaviors around that because words don't matter. How people picture words working matters. Think about this, right? Think about the last argument you had. And now that you're calmed down and you're not upset anymore, right? If you think back on it, was it actually a disagreement about what was actually being talked about, or was there a disagreement about how one of the two of you was picturing the words working? It's always that. And that's true of everything, by the way, just as a side note with the Bible, right? There's a way to say something true that create non-true imaginations. Like if I was to say, one day you'll stand in front of Jesus and he'll judge you. That's true. What's not true is the imagination I just on purpose created. In the Western world, a judge is a courtroom official, someone who stands up and determines whether you're guilty or not. In Hebrew, the word judge is a defender, someone anointed by God to set you free. Psalm 84, God is the judge of the orphan. Why is God judging orphans? You guilty orphans. But no, what? He's setting them free. And there's a whole book called the Book of Judges. These people aren't courtroom officials. They're people anointed by God to set you free. So when I say you'll stand in front of Jesus and he'll judge you, I mean one day you'll be in the final and full presence of the one anointed by God to set you free. And in that sense, I want you to be the most judgmental group of people in Pasco. I want you engaging people's broken stories in order to make a better narrative out of that story. So love and respect work the same way. Most every man in this room would think, oh, I love my wife, but that's not the question. The question is are the behaviors I'm engaging in interpreted as loving by her? And most every woman in this room would go, I respect my husband. And that's not the question, though. The question is, are the behaviors we're engaging him with interpreted by him as respectful? See, we all have different sort of fears. In general, this is all, by the way, these are all stereotypes, but they're stereotypes for a reason. So you might be thinking, I'm not like that. I'm the exception to that. That's okay. That's okay. There's not one cookie cutter way, but when you're on a stage talking to a whole group of people, you got to go with the center, right? So in general, a woman's biggest fear is whether you still see me as attractive given my aging, right? So do you still find me attractive given my aging, right? That's nowhere near a man's biggest fear. Like, look at us. We gave up on that a long time ago. You can see our foreheads from a satellite dish. That's not a thing. A man's biggest fear is, do you believe in me or do you find me stupid despite the fact that I'm trying my best, right? This is why. If you're at the best restaurant in Pasco, right? The Mexican joint we just ate at, whatever the best restaurant is in Pasco, Washington. Imagine if the prettiest woman in Washington State walked in. Right? I'm talking, wow, like holy smokes. Be honest, who's gonna notice first, the men or the women? The women by far, and they hate her. Why? She hasn't done anything. She just walked in, she just happened to be pretty. That's all, right? And if the men notice, it's gonna hurt your wife's feelings. So if the girl walks in and the man goes, whoa, yes, sir, get you some of that. Don't do that. It's going to hurt her feelings really, really bad, right? But why is that? Why is that? Men don't understand that. Why? Because if you reverse it, if the best looking man in all of Washington State walked into a restaurant, same restaurant, you're both there, best looking man in all of Washington State, it looks like somebody drew him, right? It's like, oh my goodness. He walks in. If the woman notices, we don't care, right? If the woman says, whoa, yes, sir, get you some of that. We don't care. We're like, sir, can you come here and show her your abs? Like, seriously, get her preheated. She's coming home with me. I don't know, like, really? But what would get a man is if a guy walked in, and let's say his name's John, and let's say he makes 5 times more money than you. And let's say he's recently been promoted for the 3rd time in the last 18 months. And the woman says, oh, sweetie, that's John. Oh, yeah, good on you, John, you know? She says, oh, did you hear? He's been promoted 3 times in the last 18 months. He now makes 5 times as much money as you. God, I wish you were as successful as John. Now you've done it, right? So men and women need different things. And that's obvious. And the question is, what do those behaviors look like? So a couple of initial thoughts. Next slide. Love is a function of the tension between 3 things: the perfect versus the sublime, the idol versus the icon, and destination versus cause. So let's talk about those 3 things. Love best functions not as a celebration of the perfect, but rather a celebration of the sublime. I love this quote by Jacques Lacan. He's a philosopher. And you listen carefully, and it's pretty profound. Love is giving somebody something you don't have, and they don't want it. Love is giving somebody something you don't have and they don't want it. In other words, love is not a celebration of someone's perfection. Love is not the expression of everything you love about them. Love is being able to articulate their flaws and accepting them anyway. That love is treating someone as they are worth despite what they might deserve. I don't need to tell you guys this, but when I do conferences for non-married people, I go through 40 must-ask questions that they should ask before they get serious about somebody. And not even in the top 40 is, are they a Christian, right? Why? Because there's 40 questions you should ask before that you ask, are they a Christian? Why? Because you can be a Christian jerk, okay, right? You can go from not Christian to Christian in one moment with God, but you're not gonna go from not jerk to jerk in one moment. You're not gonna go from not smart to smart. You're not gonna go from possessive to non-possessive. You're not gonna do that very quickly. So there's that. But I tell non-marrieds, unless you can articulate their flaws and unless you can articulate their first 3 moves when they don't get their way, pause the thing until you can. Everybody's first 3 moves when they don't get their way will always be the same. Always, always, always. The question isn't, can you change them? We're not gonna change them. The question is can I embrace them in spite of that? Love is a function of the sublime, not the perfect. Let's say it another way. Love is best a function of the icon, not the idol. An idol is something we set up as the primary way to get our needs met. So that's what an idol is. An idol is something that we perform rituals for in order to get our needs met. And you see marriage function at its worst when it functions out of the idol. The idol is a scorekeeper. Have you done enough for me to meet your needs? Have I done enough for that? And that ends up to score. And we use this in our language. Oh, I don't want to do this, but it'll give me brownie points with the wife. Brownie points? You collect points? She collects points? She makes you collect points? And when you cash them in, what do you get? And how many do you need before you cash them in? That is an endless game. That is a game because when it takes 1,000 brownie points to get anything done, and yet you can lose all your points with one mistake, you're in this endless sort of thing. And here's the thing, right? This is just straight psychology. The greatest gift you could give your spouse is the gift of not needing them. Because when you can give them the gift of not needing them, you can then give them the gift of wanting them. And people want to be wanted, but they can't carry the weight of being needed. It just doesn't work. The only one who can carry that is God. And so when we set our spouse up as the idol, this is what it looks like. It's, I need you to meet my needs, instead of actually, I want you to, but I'm okay one way or the other. The idol is someone we set up in our life that is our need meter. The icon is more beautiful. An icon's not an idol. It's something that draws us deeper into the mystery of something, right? So the best marriage in this room are not people who go, I've set my spouse up as my primary need meter. That is not the best marriage in this room. The best marriage in this room is also not, man, we've been married 30 years, I understand everything about them. That's not the best marriage in this room. The best marriage in this room sounds like this. We've been married 30 years, I still don't have a flipping clue, but I love every minute of exploring it. That is sublime, not perfect. It's icon, not idol. It's also, it's love best functions as a function of the cause, not the destination. So love doesn't best function in getting everything we want all the time. Meaning is normally found as a function of the object cause, not the object desire. Let me explain what I mean by that. So desire is made up of 2 things. Object desire, that's what you want, and object cause, that which stands in the way of what you want. So let's use a truck as an example. Let's say you want a new truck. The new truck is your object desire. The object cause is the cost of the truck, right? So when you finally afford the truck, all the meaning of the truck is not found in owning the truck. It's in all the memories of all the sacrifices you made in order to attain it. Hell would be getting everything you want all the time with no process at all. The same is true in marriage. Marriage, the meaning of marriage is best found in the center of exploration and cause, not in automatically just getting everything that we want. Now, let's say it a couple different ways in case you got lost in any of that. I'm gonna say those same things with sentences. Next slide. So let's say it this way. With love, you cannot help but experience the world as meaningful. Without love, you cannot help but experience the world as meaningless. I think it was Bob Marley said, some people are so poor, all they have is money. That you can be Batman in the Batcave with $60 trillion, but if you have no one to share it with and no outlet for showing love, you will experience the world as meaningless. But with love, you cannot help but experience the world as meaningful. That's why when we go on missions trips to third world countries, it's very convicting. They have far less, and yet they do appear to be happier. We have far more. Well, what's the difference? Well, somewhere we lost the epicenter of love. Without love, you cannot help but experience the world as meaningless. Let's say it this way. God is not someone you love as much as someone you find his presence in the act of love itself. This is where I don't think it would do us bad if we just lost the sentence, I love God, right? I'm not mad at it because I know what people mean by that. But I love God, what does that even mean? The scriptures teach us that the love of God cannot be separated from how you're treating the person next to you, right? So actually, God's presence is what we find when we choose to treat someone as they are worth, despite what they might deserve. I love the way Jesus said it when they asked him, what's love like? What's the love of the Father like? And he goes, look at flowers and birds. They do nothing to deserve it, but God feeds them and clothes them because they're worth it. Here's the best definition of love I've ever heard, and that is from Jesus Christ and John in 1 John. Here it is, that love is a function of treating someone as they are worth, not as they deserve. Love is a function of treating, like whoever has the best marriage in this room, and you know, in my experience, people who come to church on a Friday night to talk about marriage, you already have a good marriage, right? The ones who actually need to be here were too busy, right? I get it. So I just applaud all of you. I'm sure you have a good marriage. But whoever has the best marriage in this room, you've found a way to treat your spouse as they are worth, not as they deserve. You don't love your wife when she deserves it. There'll be days she does. Other days, not so much. That's called life. You love your wife because you find her worth it to you. And you don't respect your husband because he deserves it. There'll be days he'll amaze you with his intellect and problem-solving abilities. Other days, he's gonna be a flippin' idiot. That's called life. You respect your husband because he's worth it to you. Let's say it this way, next slide. Marriage is ultimately a dynamic, progressive revelation of who God is to the world around us. That's the ultimate function of it, is to show the world what it's like to surrender, what it's like to submit, what it's like to honor, what it's like to treat someone as they are worth despite what they might deserve. When we show that, that's sometimes the only vision of God the world will ever see, which leads to this question. If our marriages were the only version of God anyone ever knew, what would they think God was like? Or if I asked your 7-year-old, what does God think daddy's like? Would your 7-year-old go, well, mommy says daddy's an idiot? Or if I was to say to your 7-year-old, what does God think about mommy? Well, daddy thinks mom. How we speak and show the world, starting with our children, starts forming the way they see God. It's not just about marriage. It's about how our children and the people around us see God. So let's talk some basic psychology here, okay? So this is the general. Tomorrow we're gonna talk about the specific behaviors. Here's some general stuff. Next slide. The best way to motivate anyone is to meet their biggest need, and these are two big words, consistently and predictably, right? The best way to motivate any person is to meet their biggest need. So you figure out what matters the most to your wife, you figure out what matters the most to your husband, and you meet that need consistently and predictably. I'm gonna give you a way to control somebody, all right? You don't wanna do that because control is the opposite of love. Here's all you gotta do to control somebody. If your goal is to just control and manipulate, here's all you gotta do. Be purposely inconsistent. It's actually Southeast Asian prison control techniques. Here's what they do. There's too many prisoners, not enough guards. Here's what they do. They've worked out if they're nice all the time, the prisoners will revolt. If they're cruel all the time, the prisoners will revolt. So here's what they do. They have randomness. They have nice days and cruel days. And not even the guards know till they get there. Nice, 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 cruel, cruel, nice, nice, cruel, nice, cruel, 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 nice, nice, cruel, nice, cruel, cruel, nice, nice, nice. What they find is that lack of consistency leads to the prisoners losing their sense of self. And so when we're inconsistent and unpredictable with our need meeting, it creates high anxiety and low trust. But when we're consistent and predictable with our need meeting, it creates high trust and low anxieties. Here's the question. The question is not, is your spouse's need right or wrong? The question is do I want higher anxiety or higher trust in my home? And if we want higher anxiety and if we want higher anxiety, be inconsistent and unpredictable. If we want higher trust, consistent and predictable in terms of our need meeting. Let's say it this way, next slide. The easiest way to control someone is to be purposely inconsistent. To the extent you're trying to control someone is the extent you're failing to love them. Let's say it this way, number 2, next slide. You never choose to meet your spouse's need because they deserve it. You choose to meet their need because you find them worth it. He might totally deserve your disrespect. He might have done something that totally deserves your disrespect. That's not the question. The question is he worth it? And the question is, do you want higher anxiety and lower trust in your house? She might have done something that totally deserves you to stonewall her. Not speak for 3 days. Get a little tipsy. You'll show her. You'll drink to excess and not speak for 3 days. That'll teach her a lesson. Hey, she might totally deserve that. But if you act that way, it's not gonna automatically invoke feelings of respect. And nor is being cantankerous and critical back at him gonna invoke feelings of love. If the primary goal of a lady is to increase feelings of love in the home, and it is, and the primary goal of a man is to increase feelings of respect and belief in the home, there's certain ways to go about that. And she might deserve to be unloved. That's not the question. The question is she worth it? And what do you want the ultimate goal in your house to be? He might deserve your disrespect, but that's not the question. The question is he worth it? And do you want to increase feelings of anxiety or trust within your home? Here's the question. Can we give our spouse the gift of meeting their needs, whether they deserve it or not? Because ultimately, that will be profitable. That ultimately gets us where we want to go. And let's say it this way. Number 3, you can never motivate someone long-term by withholding or controlling their biggest need. It is empowering to you to meet their need first. Like guys, you'll never motivate greater feelings of respect by stonewalling and isolating and drinking to excess. Like no woman ever has said, you know what? Now that he hasn't spoke to me for 3 days and he's been tipsy every night, I just totally believe in him more. That just doesn't happen, right? It just doesn't work. And ma'am, you'll never ever motivate greater feelings of love by withholding sex and being critical about every decision he makes. You just won't. Is it your right to? Yes, absolutely. It is your body, your mind, and your mouth. You can choose the words that come out of it. You can choose the thoughts that go into it. And you can certainly choose what happens with your body. That is 100% within your right and 100% your choice. But it's not gonna invoke greater feelings of love by withholding sex and being critical of his decisions. It's just not gonna. The question is what do we wanna do? It's not gonna invoke greater feelings of respect by stonewalling and drinking a bit to excess. And the thing of it is that, can we just all admit, if there was a secret cameraman in our life when we weren't getting our way, all of us would have something that we would rather not have get out there, right? And so this is, let's say it this way. There's a way to hear a talk like this and think, man, I hope they're listening to this, right? Or you're texting Jim right now, Jim, you need to hear this, hey, Sally, tune into the live stream, seriously, he is hitting right where you live. And look, I get it. I'm the teacher. I hope everybody's listening. But here's what Jesus said. And the question is, do we actually believe Jesus' way is the best way for our life? It's the way to bring heaven to every place we see hell here. That Christianity is not an exercise in simply going to heaven when we die. It's an exercise in bringing heaven to every place we see hell here, starting with our own families. right? And if we actually believe that, he says something that's pretty hard to swallow. Here's what he said. If you want to change your world for the better, you got to see yourself as the plank and them as the speck. Pause. How are we doing with that just in general? Like, are Christians known worldwide for seeing themselves as the biggest problem and the world as the speck of sawdust? I think not. Like, this is what it sounds like. We Christians are flawed, but you're really flawed. Well, hang on. That's not how you change your world. Now let's go small. Your own household. How do we do with that in our own household? Do we always see the other person as the primary problem, or do we take a second and get the plank out of our own eye before we're picking the speck of sawdust out of our spouse's eye? If you don't want to go with Jesus, go with Paul. This is a quote from the Apostle Paul. What business is it of yours, the immorality of the world? Get your own house in order first. Yeah. What business is it of yours? And by the way, the world was far more immoral in Paul's day, particularly in Corinth, than it is now. Here are a few things that were legal in Jesus' day. Murder. Legal, as long as they were lower class than you. Rape. Legal, as long as they were lower class than you. Full birth abortion, normal, everybody did it. It was called exposure. Pedophilia, legal, as long as they were lower class than you. Bestiality, legal, as a public act of worship to the goat god Pan in Caesarea Philippi. Totally legal. Hey, strapping someone to a post and beating them to death with whips. That was legal in Jesus' day. Hey, nailing someone to a tree and waiting for them to suffocate. That was legal in Jesus' day. Putting lower class people in arenas and letting wild animals tear them apart to entertain upper class people. That was legal in Jesus' day. So be careful with that narrative. Oh, can you believe how bad this world is? Oh man, you believe how bad the world is? Compared to when? This is the best the world's ever been, and it's not even close. And it's because of the work of the Spirit of Christ that it is that. And that's the message we should be owning. Is God done redeeming the world? No. It sure is better. Look, whatever your problem is with Trump or Biden, they're not Nero, okay? They're not putting underclass people in arenas, letting wild beasts tear them apart to entertain the upper class. I get it. There's issues with everyone. I get it. But man, we should be owning that better narrative. Jesus said, if you want to make your world better, you got to see yourself as the plank and them as the speck. Paul said, quote, what business is it of yours, the immorality of the world? In other words, stop calling out the immorality of the world. Get your own house in order first. If you don't want to go with Jesus or Paul, go with Michael Jackson. If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and make a change. Yeah. If you don't like Michael Jackson, go with Pink. I'm a hazard to myself. Don't let me get me. I'm my own worst enemy. Look, when Jesus Christ, the Apostle Paul, Michael Jackson, and Pink agree on something, the chances that it is profoundly true is high. And that's what's happening in our homes. It's empowering to you to meet their need first. Number 4, in general, not always, but in general, a female's biggest need is to increase feelings of love. In general, it's not in a woman's nature to respond sexually to a man who's harsh and angry with her. She's just trying everything she can do to increase feelings of love in the home. And that's where she feels comfortable. That's where she feels safe. That's when she feels empowered. And when she finds her sweet spot in that, she's like, okay, I can live like this in peace. You know, the biggest longitudinal study ever done in the history of the United States was done by the Gottman Institute. And it was a 35-year longitudinal study of happy marriages. And you know what they found? It was remarkably simple. That there are 2 primary predictors of a happy marriage. Not people who stay married. That's a whole nother thing. People who are happy they stayed married. There's 2 primary predictors. And if you don't have these 2 things, you have a 96% chance of not having a happy marriage. The 2 predictors were remarkably simple. A lack of volatility in their presence. In other words, people who live in a happy marriage, they don't take their highs too high or their lows too low. They stay in this kind of steady thing. Here's what they did. They studied each individual person's physiology, like their pupils and their blood pressure and their pulse and the sweat. And they studied them all like that when they were by themselves. And then they brought their spouse in with all the gear hooked up. And then they said, tell us about a win. Tell us about a loss. Tell us about a fight you had. And they measured the gap between how they were outside their presence and how they were with their presence. And to a 96% predictability rate, the ones who lived without that volatility, they had a happy marriage. The second was response to bids. Response to bids, let me define that, was it's a lie that you have to like what your spouse likes. That's a lie. You just have to like that they like it, right? So the example they used in the study was novel reading and bird watching. So let's say you and your spouse are on a vacation in the mountains of wherever. And let's say your husband loves bird watching and the wife loves novel reading. And so they've got a cabin in this mountain. It's a beautiful view. She's laying in this comfortable thing, reading a novel that she couldn't wait to read. And he's got his binoculars looking at birds. And so she's sitting there and they're just both enjoying it. And he goes, oh, look, a red-bellied speckled pigeon. I don't know anything about birds. The lie is that she has to love bird watching. That's a lie, but that's a bid. And if she responds to that bid with contempt, it'll ruin the marriage. So if she goes, you and your stupid birds, who cares about birds? Yeesh. All she has to do is say, oh, really? Is that special? Is that like a rare thing? Oh, very. I'm so glad you got to see that. And if he goes, how's your novel? She goes, I'm loving this novel. The character formation, everything's so beautiful. If he goes, you and your fiction books, who waste their time reading fiction? That's contempt. But if he said, you know what? You work 50 hours a week. You help raise 3 kids. You are a critical point of our whole house. And you know what? For you to get to lay there and love something, I'm so happy about that. That's a response to bids. The Gottman Institute talked about those 2 things, that if you have a lack of volatility and you discipline yourself to respond to bids, you're gonna, in 96% of the cases, have a happy marriage. In general, a woman's biggest need is to increase that feeling of love. The question we're gonna ask tomorrow is, can we do that? And every man in this room should be thinking, how? And this is where the research is really helpful on stuff that women think is loving. And I'm just gonna tell you ahead of time, it's not gonna make any sense to men. It is not in our nature to do the things the science says that we have to do in order to be perceived as loving. It's just not normal to us. So what that means is every man in this room, in order to do those behaviors, has to do it by faith, has to do it taking a risk. And you know what that means for the ladies in the room? It means that the women should honor that risk and go, you know what, even if you don't do it perfectly, I'm gonna honor the fact that you're giving it a try. And here's the thing, what the research says about what women should be doing to be perceived as respectful to their husbands, it's not in a woman's nature for that to be her default. I think that's why Paul has to go at it the way he did. He's telling people to do the thing opposite to what's normal to them. Men find respect normal. Why? Because we learn in 2nd grade, if you're disrespectful, it's a fight, right? You don't have to tell a man, respect somebody. You have to tell a man to love them. Nor do you have to tell a woman, be loving. You don't have to do that. Women find that normal. You do have to tell a woman, be respectful. Why? Because in both cases, we find that not our normal default button of operations. And in both cases, it takes incredible faith. You wait till I read some of the research on this to you tomorrow. Some of you guys are gonna go, what? That's all it took? And some of you ladies are gonna go, what? That's it? Yeah. It's gonna be remarkably simple, but that doesn't mean it's easy to execute. It takes faith to execute these things. It takes faith to give that kind of thing a go because it goes against our grain. See, we tend to love the way we want to be loved. So women love with love acts. This is what it sounds like. I've had hundreds of people in my office, and this is what it sounds like. Shane, I love him and 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 love him, and he's still not happy. That's because he doesn't want you to love him. I don't want to drop a bomb here, but your husband doesn't care if you love him. He has no care on earth that you love him. Why? Because he already knows you love him. His deep wondering is if you respect him and believe in him and whether or not you think he's stupid or not. And men go, all you women get ready to gag, right? Men go, what do you mean she doesn't think I love her? I work 60 hours a week and I pay for the house and I da. And every woman in here goes, ah! Why? Because being an integrous provider is an act of respect. It's not an act of love. And women want more than that. Women don't care whether you respect them. They already know you do. Their deep wondering is, do you love them? And we're going to have some real talks tomorrow around behaviors that allow for that. Number 5, in general, the male's biggest need is to increase feelings of respect. It's not in a man's nature to respond lovingly to a woman who's sarcastic, critical, or has contempt for his person, intelligence, or sexuality. It's just not in us to do that. And by the way, the research is pretty clear on this, and this is a little awkward, but sarcasm is perceived by men as contempt. It's not a good way to joke with us. We see that as an affront to who we are. And I think this is why in Colossians, Paul again says, husbands, love your wife. And in 1 Peter, Peter says an unbelieving husband can be won by the respectful behavior of the wife. And in courtship and dating, we send this message very clear. In dating, a man will clearly express to a woman, I love you no matter what. And a woman will clearly express to a man, I respect and believe in everything you like. Women will go to their partner's pickup basketball games to show I'm behind you. After marriage and 3 kids and mortgages and all that, things just get complicated. Why? Because we buy things we can't afford with money we don't have to impress people we don't like. And we lose the thing that kept us together in the first place. See, women, next slide, women tend to say, I need to feel loved and treasured even if I look different. Men tend to think, I need to feel respected and admired even if I do something stupid, even if I do something out of bounds. Let's say it this way. Next slide. Is it okay for your spouse to have a different need than you? Is it okay, even if we don't understand it, for our spouse to have a different need than us? And here's the thing, right? When we conflate acceptance with understanding, it just removes something. Let me say it another way. If we remove understanding from acceptance, it taints the acceptance. So if we ever say, I'm tired of having this conversation, I accept whatever you're saying, I just don't understand a word out of your mouth, that's gonna make more talking. Because love is a function of a conflation of acceptance mixed with understanding. And when we take the time to understand, it makes the acceptance more valuable. I owe Emerson Eggerichs this. Next slide. So Emerson Eggerichs calls it the crazy cycle. And the way it goes is without love, she'll respond without respect. And without respect, he'll respond without love. And then without love, she responds without respect. And without respect, he'll respond without love. And around and around and around we go. And where it stops, no one knows. But someone's got to break it. There's also an energizing cycle. The energizing cycle, next slide, is with love, she responds with respect. And with respect, he'll respond with love. And that's where we want to get ourselves with some of the tools that we're going to talk about tomorrow. The research is very clear on this. There are 3 specific behaviors that every woman in this room, in general, assuming you're basically good-hearted, basically mentally healthy, you'll interpret as love. And there's 3 specific behaviors that every man in this room, assuming you're basically good-hearted, basically mentally healthy, you'll interpret that as respect. And I can't wait to share you with that tomorrow. So that's been about an hour. I hope that didn't seem like an hour. I hope it was funny enough and entertaining enough to keep it going. Based on your response, you like the humor. So we'll go with that. So let's pray a couple prayers. I'm gonna invite you to pray these prayers and invite the Holy Spirit into our dance. First prayer, Lord Jesus, let no one ever reject you because of the way we're presenting you. If you're willing to pray that prayer, just underneath your breath, Lord Jesus, let no one ever reject you because of the way we're presenting you. Second prayer, Holy Spirit, would you speak to us about a mustard seed size change that we could make? A mustard seed size change. And then give us the courage to act. Would you look this way? One last word of encouragement. Jesus said that permanent life change doesn't normally happen in one-time huge evental things. Permanent life change, although that can happen, permanent life change in general happens when we allow a mustard seed, something really tiny, into our ground. In Jewish literature, a person's ground is a metaphor for their heart. And here's what Jesus said. There's never a small enough change that's too small that could invoke permanent change if held to for a long time. That you let a little mustard seed into the ground, and before you know it, it's taken over your whole field. And I want to encourage you with that today and this weekend, that nobody in this room is too far gone for a small mustard seed, a 1 degree shift in your marriage. It might seem inconsequential today, and it would be today. But if you hold to it for 5 years, you're in a fundamentally different place. And the invitation of tonight and tomorrow, when we talk about the specific behaviors, is you don't have to swallow the whole thing. You don't have to go, if I can't do all of it, I may as well do none of it. I'm gonna encourage all of us to be brave enough to make a mustard seed size change. And then hold on to that and just see where it might land you in 5 years' time. I'll hand this back over to Pastor Joey and Meredith, and we'll see you guys tomorrow. Grace and peace, everybody. Thank you.
Did you guys enjoy that?
Was that helpful? Yes, amen. That was even helpful for me, more for Meredith, but I mean, you know, I'm kidding. That was really good. Shane, thank you so much.
I don't have to love fishing.
You don't have to. You just have to like it. You just have to like it.
I love that you go fishing.
It's funny because when you said that is when we were engaged, she would go fishing with me every day. And she goes, ooh, this is so good. This is awesome. And you're right. We had Raquel and JoJo. It was like, peace, you go by yourself. So it's amazing that that is so true. A lot of the principles that he shared, honestly, we've learned to bring application to them and execute them are going to be beneficial for your relationships. Tomorrow, I think, is going to be really crucial. So listen, if you know anybody that needs this, just text them, say, hey, come for an hour tomorrow. And I think it's be beneficial for a lot of people. Yeah. So please share it on Facebook, do whatever. I just want to see, honestly, great relationships that they're eventually going to build great families, because it takes great families to build great churches, and great churches to build great neighborhoods, and great neighborhoods to really build great cities, and great cities